All right, I think we'll get started. How's everybody doing? Welcome, welcome. So you are in the data center facility workshop room. We got, I think, a bunch of great topics this morning. In the afternoon, it continues on with advanced cooling, I believe, that's still in this room. I'll introduce myself. My name is Rob Bunger. I am the outgoing project lead for the data center facility, oncoming to the incubation committee. And replacing me is Brevin, who's sitting right here. And so we'll welcome him to the project lead. He's from Rackspace. The topic I'm going to go over is something that was worked on together by the whole project team. And Mark Dance, who we have here, was one of the driving forces behind the guidelines, and then Keith Sullivan, who's not here, from CS Squared, also from the UK, like Mark, was on this. So what I hope to do is this okay, volume? Is it a little too loud? Feels loud from here, but okay. Is show you where we are. This is not a finished product yet. But I'm going to go through why we did it, its background, show you where it is right now, and we will have some room to get some feedback from you guys. So we'll get going. So back in, way back in 2016, work started on what we call guidelines document to help colocation operators and their clients understand the requirements for open compute racks. And a first draft was released a little less than a year ago, and it's posted on the wiki. You can go find it and download it. And this document, this kind of shows you some of the table of contents, and I'm not going to go through this thing, but it was something that the foundation, Open Compute Foundation, wanted. And there was a lot of interest happening in Open Compute, but people didn't understand the technology from a facility perspective very well. Are the racks that much different? Are they heavier? Are they wider? Are they taller? You know, is there a UPS in the rack? You know, that type of thing. So the guidelines is really a good conversation piece to have a sit down. So if there's somebody who's thinking of deploying open compute racks within a colocation facility, and then the colo operator wants to understand if his facility can support that, it's a great document to do that discussion. And you know, this is there's a spreadsheet checklist that comes along with this document that was created, and this is kind of an example of some of the attributes. And some of it seems like common sense stuff, but for anybody that's actually constructed a data center and actually moved racks and turned racks and commissioned racks on in a data center, you know that, you know, stuff that shouldn't happen does happen. Like, you know, is the elevator tall enough to fit the rack that you have to get on the second floor? Or can the floor take the rolling weight of a 3,000-pound rack that you have to get from here to here? Or does the loading dock have enough room to uncrate, you know, 20 racks and then get them into the thing? So some of them are access, you know, some of them are power. Like each one of these racks usually takes like 3-phase power. What's the density? What's the weight and things like that? So it's a great document for that. So, you know, in order for the foundation to try to get open compute gear deployed more than just at, you know, these hyperscale data centers, right? Colo operators need to understand it, and the general users of IT need to understand it. So the second step after the guidelines, and that's what we're going to talk about today, is this checklist. And the goal of this, I'm not a checklist, sorry, this kind of assessment or OCP ready facility scorecard. And the purpose of the scorecard is for colocation operators who are interested in entering into this program can take a look at their facility. It can get graded through the scorecard, and then they can get onto the Open Compute marketplace and say, I'm a facility that's ready to host Open Compute gear, you know, put it in my facility. So it's draft, it's not complete, but the idea is that one, not only can you host open compute racks, but two, can you do it in a highly efficient and scalable way and support them over the long term? So, make sense? Now, the most interest that we've had in this has actually been over in Europe, and I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One, a lot of the hyperscale operators who are actually using open compute hardware, when they deploy stuff over in other regions outside of North America, many times it's in a co-location space, right? And so I think some of them have found that the spaces weren't what they hoped they could be to deploy their specialized rack, these specialized racks that they have. So that was probably one of the initiatives. And I don't know, I think John Laban over in Europe, he's an Open Compute Foundation guy, has done a great job of beating the drum on open compute. So just to give you a feel for how long we've worked on this, so we kind of kicked this off last summer, so it's not even a year old. And we got a fair amount of work done. It was presented at DCD London last December, and November already, as a draft. And we still have to kind of finish this thing off. So if you guys can help us give us the last bit of input, then we'll get our army of volunteers to finish the scorecard. Okay, so I'm going to now do a demo. This is if I manage my screens correctly, we'll see how this goes. Sorry about the picture. It's snowing where I'm from right now, so although I'm not too upset about being here, my wife is. Anybody been to Mystic, Connecticut? Mystic, Connecticut? Show of hands, Mystic. All right, that's where I live. All right, you can see a spreadsheet, right? Okay, so I'm going to just walk through this, and again, if you were expecting a fancy presentation, you're not going to get it. This is a workshop, so the whole part of a workshop is hopefully I get a little feedback from you. And I'll start at the beginning. The application process. So here's the rough idea. So if you're a colo that is interested in becoming part of this program, what you do is you go to this checklist, this scorecard, go download it yourself, take a look at all the things, and score yourself. And have evidence, whether it's buildings drawings or photographs, technical specs of the facility that backs up how you scored yourself. And then at the next monthly project meeting that we have, now everybody knows that we have monthly project call meetings that everybody's invited to. You don't have to be a member of Open Compute. You just sign up on the email list and you can call into any one of these things, open to the public. They would present it, say, hey, we want to come and present our scorecard for evaluation into the program. And so the project, which is made up of people like everybody in this room, would go and listen to the presentation and kind of say, yep, sounds good. It looks like you meet the requirements, or ask questions, probe them a little bit more. And if we think it's all good, we'd take that package of evidence and the scorecard, and it would come up to the incubation committee, which is now the team that I'm on. And all members within the Open Compute volunteer leadership from all the different projects would kind of look at the presentation and say yay or nay. And after that, the information could get posted on the wiki, and then this co-location would have the opportunity to be on the marketplace as a OCP ready facility. Okay, so that would be the proposed process. Any questions on that? All right, I'm going to do another survey. Yeah. Yeah, so the question was, does the score end up on the marketplace? How does that work? Is it a pass-fail, I think, is kind of the question. So right now, and this is still under development, it is a scale. Well, there'll be a minimum threshold, I think, where we say, yes, you can do it, and it's just then a matter of how well. So the scorecard would be there, and you'll notice that some of the things would be fully acceptable for a customer, and some of them might not be acceptable. So a user would be able to click on that scorecard and take a look and evaluate it for themselves, right? We want to make it as transparent as possible. Thank you for the question. Okay, so you can imagine you put in your site details, the name, where it is, lat and long, if there's multiple sites, et cetera, and then let's get to the input data. So this is where you can start really beating us up on how good you think this thing is. So here's an example. Building access, do you have a loading dock with a lift or leveler, or is it road level, or other, and, there's optimum, acceptable, oops, sorry, and then other would be, and we call it exception, because we want to say, well, maybe this particular item does not exclude you from the program, but it's just something that you have to look into and really understand, you know, how can I get the equipment into the facility, as an example. So we don't call it fail, we call it really exception, something that you need to look at in all these little items. Has anybody ever had a problem getting a rack from a truck into the building, right? Show of hands, everybody has to have that problem. It's the simple stuff. And you know, the delivery pathway of the goods, and then the pathway from the dock actually to the white space. And you know, we have some recommendations on height. Hey, it should be at least this tall. And you'll notice that this is it is all in metric. So despite what your kindergarten teacher said, you know, we are going to go metric eventually. But we'll have a North American, you know, imperial system data in there too. A joke that our company CTO used to said, he said that the British don't even use the British thermal unit anymore. Is that true? Do you guys use British thermal unit anymore? BTUs? But not too much, right? But we Americans like to use the British thermal unit still. So rolling load is another big deal, and that's important because open compute racks tend to be heavier than typical racks you see go into the colo space. So rolling loads are a lot different than static loads, as you know. And then, you know, unboxing, pre-staging area, you know, how big is that area? There you go, there's some square feet for you, and the weight. Ramps. Now Mark has a great presentation on, you know, some of these ramps. You ever seen a ramp that is about as steep as the steps that you have over here, right? To try to get a rack rolled up that thing. So the gradient of the ramp, you know, the landing area at the top, are there railings? You know, if you have a multi-story data center, the lift, we'll put elevator next to that too. Okay, right? That is elevator, isn't it? Yeah, elevator. Lorry. I'm surprised you didn't put lorry for the truck, but yeah. And then the white space, you know, access floor. So like here's one where we've had some debate as an example. Access floor clearance if used for cooling. Now this is actually, you know, there's a lot of industry recommendations on how big do you need the floor for a certain amount of airflow and all that stuff, right? Now, if you have a hard floor, the airflow distribution is different, and that's nothing. But so if you have a raised floor, you know, do we need a minimum? Do we know what the density is and things like that, which we don't. So this is something that we might potentially, I think, remove because, you know, the depth of the floor is really designed for overall density. But the point we were trying to get is, you know, can the facility support the density of racks that Open Compute can come in at? Now, you know, for those that aren't, you know, familiar, in general, like I think the initial Facebook Open Compute rack was in the range of like 8 kW. Does that sound about right? I think for those that are in the know, I think they can be up to maybe 12, 10 right now. So they're not insanely high, but they're high, but that's like average. It's super easy to get racks, you know, in the 20 kW range if you really stack them up. So it's possible to do that with Open Compute gear. And, you know, again, Brevin, feel free to say I agree or disagree, all right? All right. 9 to 12, okay, is kind of typically what you have in your facility for Open Compute type of gear. Okay, so again, just for the mic, he says you run out of switch ports before you run out of space. Okay. Then, so going down, so electrical infrastructure. You know, the number of independent circuits that are available to go to the rack, you know, is it 1 or 2 in? You know, it's probably maybe optimum to have the availability of doing 2 feeds, which I think most people. And then, circuit capacity, 32 amp, three-phase 16 amp, three-phase 32 amp, or other. We'll get some options in there for North America. Again, but if you're a North American colo facility and all you could do is a single-phase 120-volt circuit, yeah, that'll probably disqualify you from housing gear, right? And from an efficiency perspective and a sustainability perspective, it doesn't make sense, right? Now, if you're a facility in the U.S. that maybe is running the 415 to 40 volt for your IT gear, that could be an optimum type of situation. Or, as some of the gear can take, you can actually do the 480, 277, so 277 three-phase right to the rack, which would even be potentially better. Okay, and then, kind of gets into detail on what type of, receptacle would be available for each rack. Oops. Sorry, my scrolling is not too good. Now, upstream UPS options. So if, when, people build out their facility and they don't know who's coming in, usually what you see is, a data hall is all filled out and they'll have like the UPS capacity and the cooling all set for a certain amount of kW in this data hall. Now, open compute gear can come with those lithium-ion batteries inside the rack. And if you have that option, that's a cost that a customer could have. Pre-integrated rack come with battery backup right there in the rack. So does the facility have the option to give you a non-UPS feed to that rack? So now you can see, and there's probably not too many out there. Most of them are all pretty traditional. We'll have the UPS there. So that's something that could be an interesting option for colo operators to have as they build out. And they could say, I have the option of bringing in a non-UPS feed if you plan to have, the BBU inside that rack. And then there'll be maybe some, we had even discussion last night about it. So then what's the requirement of the colo, right? It might be, well, the generator must start within 30 seconds. That's your service level agreement that you'd give to a customer who has the batteries in their rack. Something like that. Airflow. Luckily, we're all pretty much in the, I think over the past 15 years, we've gotten over the hot aisle, cold aisle, hot aisle, type of thing, but it's front to back airflow for all this stuff. Air containment is going to be highly recommended, whether it's, usually hot aisle containment or a rack chimney. Cold aisle containment is still probably acceptable. No containment is not recommended, but it doesn't fully exclude you, depending on how many racks you have to deploy at what density. Aisle widths and some other stuff that we have here for cooling. Now, network infrastructure is, we're getting into the part where I'm pretty much just repeating stuff that people have told me because I'm not a networking guy. So cabling infrastructure is, this is one thing that's kind of a little bit different is, most open compute racks have all the network connections in the front. So how does the feed come into the rack? If the colo is set up for all the networking to be in the back of the rack, and then it's going to be a little more effort to try to get that thing to the connection to the front where you feed the rack. So that's something, is it all overhead versus coming up from the floor? Doesn't exclude you, but it gives you a feel for how easy it is to roll in a rack and get it running. And then what's available from a fiber type? Again, guys over here know what they mean, but I do not. And then service. We had some input from some colos. It's like, there might be interesting services that they'll be able to provide customers who have open compute gear. So if somebody comes in with BBUs or a PSU and it needs repair, do they have the skills and potentially replacement parts on site at the colo so they can go in and swap out one of the power supply modules if it fails, or a battery module, right? So that'd be kind of an interesting for somebody to know if for the service provider. And you'd want the site to be efficient. We have not debated this stuff yet. I kind of put it in there as a placeholder for discussion. But is the site efficient? And do they monitor PUE on a continuous basis so they can improve? So what's the design PUE? What's the monitoring that they have? And then from an open perspective, again, these are currently ideas, is the facility drawings and layout like public? Is it something people can look at? What are the one lines look like for this facility? So there is the open compute tenants, right, are efficient, at scale, open, and I think innovative or something like that. Did I get that right? So, there are things in those categories that we could put to differentiate facilities. So that is the checklist. And what would happen is, based upon how many optimums, acceptables, and stuff, you'd get kind of a summary score. And we have yet to figure out what the minimum level is. There's some are a must-have. There's some that maybe a minimum score to get the ready stamp, and then there'd be levels above that.
But not necessarily in the PUE, but some of the other things that you're going through, floor clearance.
Do you want to, if you can go to the mic, this is getting recorded, full disclosure, so this will be posted on YouTube later for anybody interested to see. So
watch my language.
Yeah.
So the things like floor clearance and cabling pathways, I assume it's following like an ITU or a TIA standard. Is that where some of the numbers are coming from? Or is it independent of that?
That's a great question, and I think Mark can talk a little bit to that.
Yeah, we followed some of the parameters that are in the BICSI 002 standard as a reference guide. And yeah, we're looking to get some consistent continuity between what we're stipulating here and guiding here and what's going to be in the next iteration of the 002 standard.
Yeah, and we didn't want to make anything that conflicted with existing standards, unless there was something that had to be different to support OpenCompute Gear, but there isn't. And we didn't want to duplicate stuff, so we did our best to try to focus on the differences, right? We'll assume, hey, everybody knows how to design a traditional data center facility, right? All smart people. Well, what's different about open compute, and how do we kind of score that to make sure the facility is ready, optimally ready to support an open compute gear and adhere to the open compute tenants? So yeah, good question. So you can imagine you fill out the scorecard, you have evidence that shows that you meet these things. And then this would, you'd come up with some kind of score, again, which we have to go through, debate, and vet a little bit. So that took, wow, that took the whole time, which was surprising. Sometimes I go too fast. We have a question here, and then I'll get to you. Yeah?
A lot more detailed information about the electricals, like ITHD, ramp up on generators. There's usually a control ramp. OCP specs these things. I don't see that in any of your list of items.
Oh, you mean from the rack and power V2 rack?
Yeah.
That's a good question. Okay, so that's good input. So you're saying double check the V2 rack specs and pull that in for
curves, ITIC curves, ITHD.
So if it's an existing standard that most equipment should meet, I don't want to repeat it here. Do you think, is it some?
Different facilities may have different capabilities in this regard, though.
Okay. So, all right, so we'll have to check. If there is a specific requirement for open compute gear under those parameters, so, okay, that's good.
Something we run into often, yeah.
Really? Okay, that's great feedback. So if you were evaluating a colo, you'd like to see, okay.
ITIC curve.
ITIC curve.
ITHD.
Okay.
What was the other one I said? There's some more details on
the
requirements if you go through the power supply specs in OCP.
Right.
Defined, yeah.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
Last question. Is this
Microphone.
Is this across Project Olympus?
Yes, yeah,
CG19?
definitely, yeah.
They're all very similar specifications?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. There's some minor differences in terms of like the ITIC curve, the 20 millisecond ride-through times. There's some sag conditions down to 140, 160 volts, things like this.
Now that's not on the, okay, got it. I know there was output specs from the rectifier to the bus bar. There's definitely specs there for the minimum requirement for AC into the rectifiers. We got to look at that.
Like in the facility, you'll have transfer ATSs that transfer to the catcher feeds or whatnot, and,
Right.
and UPS systems and things like this. So the racks on the electrical side see these transient conditions. Yeah,
Okay,
and I think some facilities are different than others. If I'm not mistaken.
for sure. Thank you. Great. Yes, sir. I'll repeat it. When do you expect the first version? So I look to our volunteer audience. No, so what we're so the foundation is really itching for this thing, and they want to get it finished in Q2. So I think Mark and Brevin and I have to buckle down, get this thing out. It will be emailed out. So if you're on the email listserv for the project, and we'll get the stuff out, and you can start a conversation in email and say you agree, disagree. You know, it's all good. So. Great question.
I mean, if you would like to contribute on the electrical side, most welcome. Because we are. No, we haven't got any electrical specialists.
Well,
So.
hey now, it's a.
Sorry. Well, notwithstanding.
You can see I've really got a great reputation with these guys. So.
A couple of quick questions. You didn't mention things about like building security or things like that. So you're looking to incorporate other standards? Are you looking to define your own around things like overall building security, cage security, biometrics, things like that?
We have not considered that yet, mainly because we don't know if there's a difference that is required between an open compute type of rack and a standard data center.
Right.
That's probably one.
Maybe just querying the facility and say, what do you offer, so that people can assign their own values to it.
So it's a question that could be asked and they just know.
Yeah.
Okay, good input.
And another good question to ask a company is, do you have a portal, and what is the expected turnaround time for various things? Like installing bolting down racks, smart hands, cross connect.
That's great. I like that. Yeah, so we could have another category is, do you have a portal and time for, I like it. Great, thank you very much. Input, you got that. All right. Any other last questions? We're bumping up to our next session. Okay, great. Thank you guys very much for the input and the questions. That was more than I expected, especially for the first session in the morning. So, all right. The next session up, I believe, is Schneider Electric, who's going to be talking about specifying kind of pod level designs and how you think about pods.